The next session is on making better choices, and I'm going to ask my colleagues to come on this. You'll see that in each case, we've tried to title the session just in short sound bites, what we think the lessons may be out of the experience of the three that are coming on now. And as I suggested, this is kind of a rolling process. People will be coming in and out. We had a couple of ministers who confirmed at the last minute who are stepping out of question period. They're going to come on. So it's kind of a free flow conversation. And I appreciate our colleagues being up for that challenge. I think there are 35 people that are coming into the program today, but just to flag that we've had hundreds and hundreds of people participate in City Talks as panelists, as you three are, but we've also had thousands of people listening, and there are, each of us have many, many, many people behind us who also reflect the kinds of concerns and priorities that you're going to flag for us. So I appreciate you three being willing to come on and share your experience. Benji, nice to see you. Are you in wintry Chicago? It looks as if you've got nice weather behind you. You're muted, Benji. Muted. We'll unmute you. And actually,
hi, Mary. I am in Chicago. It's not so wintry. It's in the 40s today.
Oh my gosh,
so
you're enjoying it. And Howaida, are you in Edmonton?
I am.
Yeah, and Ahmed, you're in Montreal.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, well, listen, we're so glad to have you to give some perspective. And if you think my Making Better Choices was the wrong title, by all means, redo it. But the key thing we're asking all of these sessions is, what do you think the key lessons have been through the last 1,000 days? And what do you think should stick for the next 1,000, and what we're calling the COVID dividend? What is it? What should it look like? So I'm interested in each of your perspectives about that. And I'm going to start with you, Howaida, because you're in Edmonton, and get you to start. And then we'll go to Ahmed and then to Benji. What do you think the best lessons have been? And what do you think we need to be paying attention to going forward? Over to you.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and especially since we're, returning to work and, back to work in April and taking the public transit system and seeing what we see. It's COVID's laid pretty bare for us and made clear for everyone the inequities and urban issues that many people are already experiencing. So it's not that these are new things. It's just now it's more front and center for us. It's become far more visible for many of us in our communities, the amount of work we need to do to address that equity, the inequities, the stigma, and the equal access to housing and transportation. So even now, as many of us sort of return to normal, we continue to see those disparities and issues playing out with our vulnerable populations on public transit systems and our streets. They're barely surviving. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have people who are expecting greater access to, say, bike infrastructure, open spaces, because some of that became even more apparent for us during COVID, and the need for us to have access to those important places. So, and who expected sort of that e-bike boom, which is great for getting a greater segment of the population to consider biking as a means of getting around. But and so, this is great for the environment, livability, vibrancy, and all of those great things for our cities and urban centers. But we need to recognize the privilege that then comes with that and having access to e-bikes, and ensuring that we're not only hearing, again, from that kind of select group of the population. So generally, what I've been reflecting on as an engineer is I generally think the expectation of city planners and engineers is that the professions that we are in are increasingly needing to broaden what city building means in our respective disciplines. So as an engineer, I'm continuing to be expected to bring, well thought out technical solutions to the table, but there's an added expectation that we co-consider equity, ecology, and climate alongside of our traditional technical focus areas. So the ways in which we apply our professional practice is shifting. I think the expectation now is that we're quite multimodal, that as engineers and planners who are working in an urban context in particular, and not only apply sort of our academic training, but we're also co-considering, like I say, the equity, climate, and social impacts of the work we do and the change it can have. And so at least from my perspective, that is pretty much the expectation of our elected officials, the public writ large, that there is this expectation pretty much as a matter of fact now.
Your job hasn't gotten easier.
Not at all, but I would say more rich.
That's interesting, more varied. And this idea of equity, ecology, and climate. I'm just curious, Howaida, what is the ridership on transit in Edmonton sitting at right now? you know?
I believe the latest is that it's hovering closer to 80%, 80 to 85% of what it was. So it's not too bad. I
Right.
personally ride it every day and I do see it being quite well used. Needing to start re-wearing my mask again, that's for sure, because I feel
Yeah.
like very close quarters now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, you know, we're looking at foot traffic numbers because of all the work that COI is doing on main streets and downtowns. And the foot traffic seems in certain cities to be bumping up, as is transit bumping up, but they're not going into their offices. So this is, it's a weird kind of counter dynamic. You kind of, don't you find, and if you're in traffic, the traffic is terrible. And you're looking thinking, well, where are people going if they're not actually going to their office? So and as you suggest, the equity challenge is quite significant in terms of and you laid out that juxtaposition about we need vulnerable populations and essential workers need access to transit. And we've also got this pressure to suddenly put in new bike lanes. It's hard to square that, eh?
Yeah, it's quite a spectrum, I would say right now.
Yeah.
Like, and again, I think it's just come to bear because COVID just kind of really focused in on those things that we need as human beings.
Yeah.
So for the most vulnerable, just the very basic things like food, shelter, and mobility. And for others of us who have the privilege of having some of those basics in place, then it was like, oh, well, what are my other human needs that I have that need to be fulfilled? And it's that, you know, having access to open spaces and ecology and nature. So it's quite interesting, actually.
It's been such an interesting time to kind of reflect all of that coming at us at the same time with not much breathing space. I appreciate all you've been through, Howaida. You know, you're a public servant. You've been at your desk or at your post through this whole period of time. It's just remarkable what you've been able to summon. And as you say, the important lessons going forward. Ahmed, let's hear from you, and then Benji in Chicago.
Hi, thanks, Mary. Thank you so much for having me today. I think one of the things we didn't learn is that transit is an essential service. We kept saying transit is an essential service. We need to keep it. We need to keep funding it. So we need to keep people, essential workers, getting to their destinations. And now we forgot that. Now we are telling, oh no, transit needs to be making money more, and we need a higher fare box recovery ratio, trying to get it to make money, while transit shouldn't be making money. It's just it's a service that will help us in many aspects, in equity and in our fight against climate change. So we have to keep thinking of transit as essential service, and we need to understand that telecommuting is a fact. It's here to stay. What happened with the telecommute, with the COVID, it accelerated our movement to telecommute. Many of us now are working 1 day, 2 days from home, 3 days from home. Some people go only 1 day to the office. So transit agencies has now to adapt. We need to understand that we won't have all the ridership that was pre-COVID to come back right away, because there's this new telecommute that it's happening, it's staying, and we have to start offering new transit fares, new flexibility in the fares. So that's one thing that some agencies did catch up, and they're offering that, others are not. So that's from the transit perspective, so I don't think we learned well in the transit aspect, to be honest. And many of us, like many agencies, are still now struggling, and the politicians are now putting the pressures on the agencies to deliver. Like they can't do. There's no like many.
Plus they're big lumbering systems, right? I mean, I know Benji will talk a little bit about this because he's familiar with smaller systems, but that's one of the dilemmas, as you suggest, is to try to get one of our large transit systems in the Canadian cities to actually change much of anything. And they're not always as integrated into the regional system as they might. You have that in Montreal, you've got that challenge too.
So that's one thing. The other thing that we learned, I hope we learned it well, is that we can do a lot on active transport.
Yeah.
So active transport, we succeeded to put across the country amazing bicycle lanes, excellent pedestrian streets all over North America. This has happened and took place. And the fight against these, so that it's the war on cars and we can't do it, nobody's going to come. All of that. You were just saying that you're finding people moving in downtowns and people are coming and walking around. So these are successful things that we can do, and we learned that we can do it quickly, and people will support it. But we need to also understand the dynamics, the local dynamics when we're making these decisions. In Montreal, in some of these projects, People really wanted them and want to keep them after COVID and after they were placed. But in others, they were done quickly. They didn't consult well on it. So there was a lot of back and forth with local groups, and a bike lane was removed after it was being placed. Why? Because there was a fight there and they didn't talk to the people before they put it in, understand the situation. So I think we learned that we can do a lot in active transport, but we need to talk to people. We in some of these projects, we didn't talk enough. So that's why some of them got a backlash on them from people.
You know, this is one of the dilemmas, I think, is that on the one hand, we acted quite quickly. And that was a positive, I think, during COVID, that there was that we were able to provide nimble response. But as you've suggested, Ahmed, there was a backlash that people didn't feel adequately consulted. And I think this is this tension we carry, and you would carry at Howaida as a professional working for the municipality, is that how do we actually make sure we're consulting effectively, but that we also still get some stuff done? Ahmed, can I ask you a more question about money? And then I'm going to go to Benji on scale. You know, during the crisis, in Canada, the federal government stepped in and provided relief and actually provided resources that could compensate for drops in fare boxes. Do you think we're going to hit that point where we recognize that, as you suggest, transit itself is an essential service and it should be funded as an essential service? In other words, the federal government should not be resisting providing resources to help with the operating costs of transit. Have you given thought to that?
I hope. I hope that we will get there, because this is one of the things I think we didn't learn. Now we are putting most, if you look across all of North America and all of in Canada, almost all of them are in deficit. All of them are in deep deficit, all transit authorities. And we told them, keep the transit at the higher level of service you had before COVID, because it's an essential service, but we're not going to give you the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it can't be, you can't get it both ways.
Yeah, and maybe during the crisis we were willing to squeeze people, but now we've got to get to the reality. So Benji, you work around the world. You know about informal transportation systems as well as formal ones. You're our fellow here at CY. We appreciate having your perspective always. Give us a sense from you, what you think the COVID lessons need to be, and then going forward, how would you prioritize investments and policy development? Over to you, Benji.
Thank you for inviting me. I'll give you a short snapshot of all the points I'm going to make, and then I'll go deeper into it if we have time. I think the last 1,000 days brought to very stark contrast who gets to move and who is not allowed to move, right? So it's mobility and immobility, not just are we getting anywhere, but who are the people who can't move, particularly in a pandemic situation. And that's really around the definition of what is mobility justice, right? Which Mimi Scheller writes a lot about. I really like what Howaida said about the transport agencies now have to think multimodal, and that's one of the things we hope is breaking. I'm not sure if we've learned that lesson, as Ahmed says, that it's not just bus, train, and private. It's a whole spectrum of shared mobility, everything from sidewalks that you can walk on safely to get to somewhere that's less than a mile away, to public transportation, in that bike shares and car shares and ride hailing, that all needs to exist. And so it's not just a binary choice. And then active transportation, you said it, right? We move very, very quickly. Paul Romer, this is overquoted, right? A crisis is a terrible thing to waste. I will add a corollary, especially if you waste it in committee meetings. Not in public consultation, but in committee meetings. What it made very clear was the agencies could move very fast if you took away all the required committee meetings, not the public consultation, but the committee meetings of just getting it done. So key points. Transit is critical to essential workers. We kept saying they're essential workers, and so, but then we weren't getting them to places, right? And how will they get there? We don't know. The burdens increase for those with limited transportation options, right? You can't telework, right? So that disparity of people who are allowed to telework and people who are not allowed to telework or can't, and then you couldn't get there. And then very clear in the US, 1 in 4 adults are transportation insecure, meaning if your primary mode of transportation to get to work or wherever you need to go disappears, bus doesn't appear, or your car breaks down, you are transportation insecure. You have no other option. And that idea of transportation insecurity needs to be a critical thing we address. And that whole frame of transportation is essential. It's a utility. If we treated transportation like electricity, then someone losing transportation for the day is a tragedy that needs to be addressed immediately. Not, oh, sorry, you can't get to work. You'll just wait tomorrow. So, okay, another terrible thing, SUVs are killing us. Right? So in the US, per capita, VMT dropped down or traffic dropped down, but deaths rose. 43,000. I think it's a 16%.
We just lost Benji temporarily. I don't know if we're just having an, go ahead, Benji, keep going. And I just saw Hawaii's cat make an appearance. Benji, go ahead. What happened to SUVs?
Oh, SUVs are killing us, basically. And then if you electrify, they're heavier, right? So that whole idea of 30 miles per hour is safe with a vehicle that's electric, that's half a ton heavier, is going to be way more dangerous. And so we really, really need to solve electrification is never going to be enough. On to the good news, just a little bit of good news. Bike share bounced back rapidly, more rapidly than any of the other modes. I think they're back on a 21% increase from 2019. So the bike shares, and this is accompanied by booming sales of electric bikes, right? So that's really, really good. We learned, and there's a very recent paper coming out from Toronto, that using the curb for restaurants, right, and patios is like, it earns 49% more than you would have earned from parking. And so that's better use of the curb, better use of public facilities if we make them for social uses. And then recently coming out of MIT DUSP, the slow streets allow us to connect more socially, which is kind of intuitive, right? We just have never, but there's documented information that actually happens when we slow our streets. So I'll stop there.
You know, it's interesting going forward, this notion of an essential service, this is what I'm appreciative of, is this idea about equity, access, and an essential service. And this idea that why isn't transit seen like electricity? And, I know there will be people later today that will say, why isn't housing treated like electricity? So I guess the question for each of you is, if you were advising a senior public official in one sentence, what guidance would you be giving them in terms of their priority for 2023?
Could you repeat that, Mary?
One thing. What would you say? If you could talk to the Prime Minister of Canada, what would you say the priority should be in 2023 in terms of the priorities that you see in urban life? I'll go to Howaida first.
Yeah, I think just as an Edmontonian and what I see, it would have to be housing. But I think we've been talking in this country about housing and the crisis very specific to Toronto and Vancouver, I must say. And I think there's a crisis of housing. Housing is kind of on a spectrum as far as I understand it. And so having that housing with wraparound services for vulnerable populations, to me, is the priority, I think, at this moment, at least here in Edmonton. From what
so it's a holistic solution that involves supports and housing co-located in ways that would, and transit would support that, obviously. That's and right. This interdisciplinary approach. Ahmed, to you. One thing to the problem.
I'm a transit person, so I'll take it from the transit part. I would say keep the public transport running and remove the stress and the burden from the transit authorities, that they have to operate or they have to cut service, because cutting service means cutting some of the essential services that we're providing.
And so this expectation that they have to make money is this is a weird kind of concept that we've somehow built in. We don't expect other public services to make money, but somehow transit has to. Okay. Yeah. So that's yours. Treat it as an essential service and don't expect it to make money. Benji, to you.
Treat a car dependency as a public health crisis and a climate threat, and create a plan to move the whole country, the whole population away from car dependency.
Mm-hmm. And it's the end of SUVs. All right, all of you on the line who are watching, go trade that SUV. And let's just, we have to get serious about this. I think, we are at this inflection point. You know, where do we stand on these things? Where do we stand on equity? Where do we stand on climate? Where do we stand on all the issues that are going to be raised today? And I just want to thank you guys for coming on. What's the name of the cat, Howaida? Who is this little cuddly one in front of you?
So I've been trying to keep her down, but this is Scoot. She's a rescue cat. She's a COVID cat. We took her in actually as a foster family and just couldn't resist her and decided.
Oh my gosh. And Benji, who's your cat?
This is Inigo Montoya or Monty.
And Ahmed, aren't you sad you don't have a cat at your office in McGill? Really? I mean,
Yeah, I don't have one. So next, I'll try to get a dog.
Well, listen, I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you three over 2023 because it isn't for the faint of heart. The work is still going. COVID isn't over, but what we're really saying is the challenges are now before us, and let's never waste a crisis, as was put in the chat. So thanks for joining us, Benji, Ahmed, and Howaida. Have a nice day where you are, and we'll be talking to you lots in 2023. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks
Good
so
to
much.
see you.
Bye.